So, enormous Blizzard fanboy that I am, I've been playing their massively multiplayer online game World of Warcraft on and off since its vanilla release in 2004? 2004! Oh my god, what a waste of a life. And like a lot of the player base, I was hugely disappointed with Warlords of Draenor, the latest and by far the worst expansion to the game. Draenor got off to a rocky start with server problems for a good part of its first week of release, and the developers totally unprepared for the volume of players trying to access the new content. Now it turns out that funneling thousands of players into the same location and having them all try to interact with the same object at the same time causes server problems, but hey, who could have seen that coming? And for me at least, that first week really set the tone for the rest of the expansion. I liked a few things about it. The leveling experience was very well designed, and the music, as always, is top notch. But overall, I got the feeling that Blizzard was kind of phoning this one in. And so, with the next expansion on the horizon and Warlords of Draenor finally and mercifully breathing its last, I'm going to complain about it for roughly 10 minutes. Now, the biggest and most glaring problem with Draenor is the lack of content compared to previous expansions. There just wasn't enough to do at max level. If we compare it to Mists of Pandaria, the previous expansion, that launched with a new class, a new race, and a new starting zone, and now Draenor launched with no new classes, races, or starting zones. Pandaria was released with 3 raids and added 2 more for a total of 5. Draenor was released with 2 and added just 1 more for a total of 3. Now if we look at the first major patches, in Pandaria's patch 5.1 they revamped the Krasarang Wild Zone and they added new quest hubs, new faction reputations, 5 new scenarios and the Brawlers Guild, as well as lots of other little quality of life improvements. In Draenor's first content patch they added a music box which plays songs when you click on it, and a camera that you can take selfies with, and that's about it. I mean, what you're looking at here is basically all the new content they added in 6.1. I'm sorry actually, they also added Twitter integration, so by simply typing /share, you can show all of your Twitter followers all the fun you're having with your new music box and selfie camera. Now, after the initial patch, Draenor only added 1 new zone and 1 new raid. In Pandaria, comparatively anyway, they were adding new things all the time, raids and zones and new islands and quest hubs and PvP things for all those crazy people who try to play Warcraft PvP. Now, I could tell something was up with Draenor before it was released when Blizzard announced that they were changing Draenor's faction capitals. Now, originally, the Alliance was supposed to be located in Karabor and the Horde capital was in Bladespire Citadel. I thought this was a really good idea, setting the capitals in important locations that feature prominently in the story. But then Blizzard announced they were changing the hubs to generic human and orc settlements on Ashran, the PvP island that everybody hates. When I saw Ashran, however, I said, oh, this isn't so bad. It's all under construction, and then Blizzard will obviously patch it over time and it'll get more complete, and you'll get to watch it progress into a full settlement. But no, it still looks like this. Unfinished, underdeveloped, and never to be fully fleshed out. So let's talk about the Garrison. Now, the Garrison is Draenor's flagship feature, and it's where players spent the majority of their time. When Garrisons were first announced, they were going to be highly customizable. You could use architecture from all the game's different races. They were also going to be flexible in terms of location, with players able to pick the zone in which they wanted to set up their garrison. Now, as launch date got closer though, this was scaled back to 1 generic orc or human aesthetic in a fixed location, and this was really disappointing and it made the garrisons feel a lot less unique. Now, when I first heard about the Garrisons, I thought they'd be guild garrisons, because after all, Warcraft is a multiplayer game and it's meant to be played with other people. But instead the developers took the route of instancing each person in their own garrison, where they never encounter other players. This was a big mistake for reasons which should have been obvious prior to development. Now, as far as actual gameplay in the Garrison, again, there just isn't enough to do. Players saw everything the Garrison had to offer very early into the expansion, and after that, Garrison activities offered no real sense of progression or reward. This wasn't helped by the inclusion of the shipyard, which was a totally redundant feature, nothing more than a reskin of the Garrison follower missions, with the added feature that now your ships can be destroyed and you lose all your progress. It's like Blizzard said, hey, you know that really boring Garrison follower mechanic that everyone's sick of by now? Well look, we made it even worse. Enjoy! Now, my personal dislike for Draenor mainly stems from the story, which is absolutely dreadful. And now you might say, Warcraft has never really been about the story, it's generally just an amalgamation of fantasy and adventure elements stolen from better stories. And you'd be right to say that, Warcraft's writing has never really been that good. There's some cool stories here and there, but on the whole, Blizzard's writing is fairly average. That is, until Draenor, which is just awful. It's a mess of retconning and plot holes and poorly conveyed ideas. Blizzard's announcement that the expansion was going to feature time travel naturally led to a lot of confused questions from the player base. You know, were we changing the past? Does changing the past affect the present? What about characters that existed in the past and are still alive, like Velen and Garrosh and Vindicator Murad? Are there two of all of them now? You know, what's going on? In response, Blizzard, who was seemingly taken completely by surprise by these questions, announced that not only was Draenor set in the past, it was also taking place in an alternate dimension. And I thought, well, oh brilliant, time travel and alternate dimensions. Well, that's just great. This plot hole combination totally robbed all the story beats of any real weight. For example, when Velen sacrifices himself for the greater good, the player character's just standing around like, yeah, well, we have a spare Velen, and if he dies, I guess we can just grab another Velen from one of the alternate dimensions that apparently exist now. And what about the idea that the orcs don't drink the demon blood? I really hated this change. The original story is a nice little inversion of the typical orc fantasy tropes. You know, initially, the humans think the orcs are savage, bloodthirsty monsters, but really they're just being used as pawns by the real evil, and when they're free of the corruption, the orcs are spiritual and shamanistic people, and they just want to make a home for themselves. Warlords of Draenor completely ruins this idea by having the orcs act exactly the same regardless of whether they drink the demon blood or not. They're still trying to invade Azeroth even when they're not being forced to do it. This is frankly a bizarre change which accomplishes nothing in the story except making the original demonic corruption element seem completely pointless. Not least because in 6.2 they end up drinking the demon blood anyway, so what was the point of having them not drink it in the first place? The other issue with the Iron Horde is that the player base had just played a year of Siege of Orgrimmar, and that raid was full of orcs, and more orcs. And then Warlords of Draenor comes out, and Blizzard says, right, who's ready for some more orcs? And we were like, well, actually, Blizzard, we were ready for literally anything else. So let's talk about the Iron Horde's invasion of Azeroth that lasts all of 15 minutes before they're kicked back through the portal in total defeat. This is another issue with Draenor's story. The titular Warlords of Draenor, they never seem like a real threat. They spent all that time and effort building the Dark Portal, and it gets destroyed in about half an hour. And after that, the threat they pose to Azeroth kind of disappears. And I don't care about the threat they pose to Draenor, because this is time travel alternate dimension Draenor. It's not our Draenor. Really, with regards to actual Azeroth, the only thing that changes in the whole expansion is that Gul'dan comes back to life. Blizzard could have released one of those little animated comics on their website showing Sargeras or someone resurrecting Gul'dan, and we could have skipped Warlords of Draenor entirely. The final point I want to make is about the player character's role in the story, and now this is just my opinion, but I don't want my character to be a garrison commander or a leader of the Alliance or Horde forces. It unnecessarily imposes a role on the player in a game where that sort of thing should be left to the player's imagination. Now I can guess at Blizzard's reasoning for this. Maybe they wanted to show the player characters being honoured for their past accomplishments or something, but its effect is to ruin the player character's arc within the expansion. If we look back at past expansions, players typically start out in a relatively lowly and humble place. For example, in Burning Crusade, you're just another soldier going through the portal. In Wrath of the Lich King, the best expansion, when Alliance players get off the ship in Northrend, they're greeted with a recruitment line for the expedition. And in Cataclysm, the recruitment soldier for the Vashia zone simply refers to you as Citizen and asks for your help on the mission. The player character might be granted a little more respect than the ordinary soldiers, but overall there's a sense you start out as just another recruit. And then over the course of the expansion, your character's reputation grows. And then in the final raid against whatever the primary antagonist is, the NPCs treat your character like a great hero.
The flow of darkness abates. It seems you truly are the heroes of legend.
Draenor upends this simple story arc by starting your character out with a big victory over the Iron Horde, the destruction of the Dark Portal, and then it immediately casts you as the commander of the Alliance or Horde forces on Draenor. And from there, there's nowhere for your character to go. And maybe it's just me, but I think that certain characters and story elements should be kept out of the player's reach somewhat. I mean, I don't want big lore characters like Muradin Bronzebeard, for instance, turning up in my garrison like an ordinary quest giver. It makes them seem pedestrian and boring when we should have a sense of reverence for their status and position. I will say though, Blizzard, if you are dead set on having the player character be some sort of big Horde or Alliance commander who's important to the story, don't then get scared and start taking control away from them when it comes to important story moments, like for instance, the quest where it looks like you're going to get to kill Garrosh, and then they take control away from you at the end and say, oh sorry, actually we needed you to lose that fight so that Thrall can fight against Garrosh instead. You can't have it both ways. Either let us participate in the story as a big important lore character, or have us in the background as one of the nameless adventurers who assists the major lore characters. Trying to do it both ways pleases no one. So what advice would we give to Blizzard going forward into Legion to help them avoid the mistakes they made in Warlords of Draenor? Well, personally, I'd say take out all of the bad things that were in Warlords of Draenor and just replace them with good things. So more good things, fewer bad things, and bring scenarios back. I like those.